I'm starting.
Oh,
Yes. Okay, recording. Oh, so we're ready to go, are we? Yes, right. Okay, brilliant. Let me see if I can share my screen as well. There we go. You'll see a picture of yourself come up in a minute. And then I shall present from here. And then hopefully we're rolling. Okay, cool. Awesome. So I will talk, and if you, I don't know how you guys go about doing questions and stuff. So I can only see one person in the room, which is good for my nerves anyway. There might be an empty room or lots of people there, but so I'll talk, and then I guess questions at the end. If you need to interrupt me, that's totally fine. If I go off subject or whatever, for whatever reason, that's totally fine too. So, yeah, thanks for inviting me to talk with you guys today. It's a very real privilege, and I'm very do so and honoured. And so it's a tricky one. It's my first talk to a university group, and used to talking to camera clubs and other groups, naturalist groups, and stuff like that. But for some reason, this one feels a little bit more nervy and I've been thinking about it, and I'm a bit like those Great British Bake Off bakers who sort of managed to prep certain pieces, but haven't quite managed to put it all together yet. So we'll see how it goes anyway. But what I wanted to start with was a story that I came across. I came downstairs. I've got two young kids, and they have a kids version of YouTube on the TV. And I came down, and they're watching this weird thing, if I'm being honest. Watching Minecraft tips and stuff like that. But watching this video, and the story of the video really caught my imagination actually. And it's the Roblox animated video of these two young people who are down on their luck. They're living off their wits. They haven't got much money. They're much on the streets, and they find a penny on the street, and they swap this broken camera, and it's 5 or 6 minutes of trial and tribulation, but by the end of this adventure that they go on, they're making $1 million, as they say, out of the camera and the photographs that they're taking. And it's a very so it's this, and it's what I find interesting is it highlights the paradox that photography is in that, you know, we photography today is seen as this easy medium that enables people to make a quick buck out of photography. And we're on a degree course. I'm sure you'll agree that photography isn't easy. And as people in the industry or trying to make it in the industry will attest that it is anything but a quick buck to be able to make a living out of photography. It's a hard thing. Yet, I think the truth is that photography is easy. It's certainly it gets easier and easier. And what if I wake up in the morning after a Friday night out or whatever, and my kids pick up my camera, my phone, they're probably more likely to get a better photo than I am because they'll be more awake for starters, and they'll be more tuned on, and they'll probably know my passcode better than I do as well, to be honest. So in terms of where we are with photography, is definitely perceived to be an easy thing to be able to pick up and take a photo to, the older days where you had film and 5.4s and all those kind of manual focus, all those kind of things. And so straight away from the off, as technology advances, we have to fight this perception of photography being easy and being able to make easy buck out of it. And so I came to this and I was thinking, well, what do I want to share with you? What do I want to give you guys? Because I mean, this could be an opportunity for me to grandstand, right? Or show off an amazing portfolio and then possibly tricky shots that I've managed to get. But, what's the use in that? That's no value to you at all. And so I started thinking about, my experience. I did my degree under Mark. I know you'll find it hard to believe that Mark's to have taught someone as old as me at degree level, but he did. And so I guess I want to share some far trips, maybe some bits where I went wrong, some avenues that I would have maybe taken differently. And then I'll go on and talk about my contemporary practice, what I do now, how I go about things, and where I want to be, because I'm, every photography career is dynamic. You don't arrive at a point and sit back and well, sit back. It's always progressing, and the nature of photography is always evolving, and that doesn't give you a chance to stop, because you have to stay on the conveyor belt or one of those things that you walk on that's always moving. The airports, whatever that's called. I can't travel later, I think. So, I mean, one of the first questions that I continue to ask out throughout my career from leaving college, and if we accept that photography is at least perceived as easy, what we need to ask ourselves is where and what is the value in photography today? And that's, again, that's a dynamic question. We have to be asking that, because as the world changes, as technology changes, the value in photography is going to change. So if you want to survive or even thrive as a photographer, there's no point in hammering against an avenue that is where no one perceives the value of photography, and I think one of the examples that I can give of that is probably stock libraries. Okay, so photo libraries. When I was doing my degree, we had people, guest lecturers, come in, and it was just, I think it was just coming past the golden. I haven't told you when I graduated, have I? I'll let you guess. You can tell by as I share photos throughout, you'll see the hairline start to go further and further back. So I'll let you guess at what year I graduated. But really, the photographers that were coming, they're just coming out of the golden era. But these guys were paid to fly business class out to somewhere like the Bahamas. They were taking pictures of beaches whilst drinking champagne and, eating caviar or whatever. Then they'd fly business class back, and then they get paid a nice little check for doing the shoot. And then they'd continue to get more money as those photos got used by magazines and advertising and stuff like that. And those days are well and truly over. And I mean, I've dabbled in stock libraries, photo libraries myself. I think a lot of people did, particularly during lockdown and stuff. And I can tell you, it's a very, very weird industry in that I will have a picture that sells for a couple of £100, but most of them sell for less than a couple of quid. And the interesting thing about that, to sort of go off on a little tangent, I do that from time to time, I'm afraid. But the interesting thing about that is that it's the big companies that buy your photos for not very much, and it's the little companies and small individuals or small organizations that are paying the couple of £100. And so I've seen photographs sell for quite a fair amount of money in small circulation pieces. And then I've seen one of my photos on the front of a national newspaper where they've paid 25p for it, which is incredible. So that's the sort of state of stock photography, and I don't really invest in that anymore, and I'm not sure many people. I'm sure there's ways of making money from it, but it's really to demonstrate how the state of flux of the photography industry is, and you have to really be on your toes if you want to keep yourself afloat and keep surviving in photography. And I did make a point here just to touch on one more thing with stock photography that really is an alarm for me, is that you have no control over the context in how that photograph's used. Because I had an experience where a photograph taken for conservation motivations and to highlight conservation issues suddenly gets used in a more right-leaning newspaper to anti-conservation, anti-rewilding, like look at this. And I've seen it in other, so sometimes you can show behavior. So one of the classic one is of a So quite often birds will go onto sheep, pick out loose wool and hair from sheep and carry it over to nest. And then it gets used in a social media campaign or press campaign saying, look at these birds picking on lambs and sheep and stuff like that. Anyway, totally gone off the point. But the point is that stock libraries you lose control of the context of your work. I'm a little bit wary of photo libraries these days, but that was a slight tangent I went off on. I do that. I apologize. So hopefully you'll. So let me move from that awful snapshot of and go back to maybe one of the questions that I wish I could address. I mean, I don't know how I would address it, but I wish I could have addressed it earlier, because I've been into photography from a very, very early age, and you can see there all my hair. So that camera my mum bought me from the Avon catalogue. I don't even know if anyone even knows what an Avon catalogue is, but effectively, I guess it's like Amazon, sort of cheap gifts and stuff like that. So I got my camera, and really the moment that photography captured my imagination was when I took a photo of a swan taking off, and this notion of being able to freeze a slice of time and then reflect on it was just mind-blowing for me. And when I saw that photo, I was, yeah, I love that that being able to just pause and look back at that and reflect on it, and that's something that stayed with to today. But in terms of knowing what kind of photographer, I knew I liked photography. I knew I wanted to forge something of my future with photography, but that's not enough, I don't think, to give direction in life. So when I graduated with my degree, a lot of my mates that I came back to London and hanging out with my mates, so lucky, you know what you want to do. You're so lucky you've got a vocation and you've got that kind of direction. And actually, really, it's just photography isn't really a direction. It's just as in what you want to do, because what I found myself doing is I would come across it, and quite a few and few big ones which I would just walk away from or not engage with, or sort of because I thought that might push me down a tunnel I don't want to go. I've always had this fear of being narrowed or put in a box or categorized, and there's that theme will come out as I talk today. But I use that, and if I'm being brutally honest, a bit of fear is scared of failure, and I use the sort of pass up on opportunities. And so I think if you know the kind of photographer you want to be or want to become, help you in getting there faster, because it certainly stopped me getting there. And then the second thing that I think you want to ask yourself is, or no, not ask yourself, but if you want to set some what anyway, if you get an opportunity, say no to it if you've got another opportunity in front of you, because you will get an opportunity once they graduate, and what you see, that's where everything changes. But you will get opportunities, and this is what I didn't do. I didn't embrace them. I was opportunities for lots of different reasons, but I used to think it would be like, well, if I take this opportunity, that opportunity, but the thing was that opportunity didn't exist. That was in my head, opportunity that might come, and that wouldn't come if I chose this particular opportunity. So, and what I've found, actually, the more opportunities you take, the more opportunities start you. And for anyone who finds themselves, they are feeling a bit scared or they might make a mistake. I mean, I know of some really amazing mistakes. I know of a photographer, right? and I'm definitely not going to name them. They slipped on the button on the side of the lens, right? So turned it off to and forgot to put it back onto autofocus. Quite a high end in Kensington. Every single photo out of focus, right? Disaster, yeah. But that person today works for Vogue and Cosmopolitan, loads of really good brands. So there is always, do not be afraid of making mistakes. In fact, the more mistakes you make, you'll improve and the much better photographer you become. The worst thing that could happen to anyone, I think, is you don't make any mistakes. So you wing it, wing it. And then if you make a mistake after winging it, really knocks you back. So just say yes to every opportunity, really, I think. And that's definitely something that I would have said to myself and when I was graduated and doing my degree as well. And so if I said no to all these opportunities, what did I do when I left college? I went to art college, did my degree. And well, I played this route that was in my head that allowed me to be free and not get tunneled down in any kind of direction. And what that involved was doing lots of different things. And I managed to get in with a couple of editors who would book me for these kind of publications that I didn't even know existed. And it turns out when I came out, and again, this is quite a long time ago now, so things change. But what hasn't changed is that there will be avenues of work that you wouldn't even dreamed or thought of, and that's the theme. Whether those dry up and new ones come across, there will always be these unexpected avenues that will allow you to survive as a photographer if you're looking for them. And so this was kind of a part of almost like, how Coca-Cola owns everything. It's a bit similar in the publishing industry. And within that, you have all these tiny other little houses and publications and stuff like that. So I ended up being able to take photographs for them once or twice, or all the different ones once or twice a month. And that wasn't enough to survive, but that was certainly help and kept me taking photographs. And I did other things like, I would do shift work as well in pubs, warehouses. One of the other things I did a lot of was workshops. I did from the moment I left. And another thing, like basically any job that allowed me to be free, essentially, to drop things and pick things up, I did. And the interesting thing, I think, here, what I did during this time, we're talking about, I guess, first 5 to 10 years of graduating. The interesting thing at that time was web design and websites. So websites were a big new sort of thing. You had to have them, but there wasn't anything like Squarespace or Wix or anything like that. So while I was doing these shoots for the magazines, and I was in also days where I wasn't doing any of these things, I would be down at London markets selling my photographs as prints or cards and things like that. So I was really doing a lot of different things. But then I started doing web design in nightclubs. And what that allowed me to do was opened up a lot more doors into businesses that might not be willing to spend their budget on photography yet, but they have to spend their budget on a website because they need a website and they need that website up to date. So this is that thing that I was saying about perception, okay, of what, like, you might find a director of a company that thinks, oh, well, Joe takes photographs at the weekend. They can do my photography for the business, but Joe doesn't know how to build a website. This guy knows how to do a website, and they book you. And so what I found was when I was doing jobs for website, I could then maybe move and push the photography idea because they're more reluctant to spend money on photography because they see it as easy, but they can't do websites. And so there was a period where I was still doing all this, but I was doing websites and then getting more work as a photographer after or during doing websites. So I'm sure that there's areas and industries where you can translate that into a different set of skills. And I think the theme of today, or one of the themes of today, is that kind of that diverse range of skills, and learning skills that are in demand can open up doors to other avenues and things like that as well. So I did say this is a very poor screen grab from my website, but I workshops and education has always been a really core part of what I do. And for those 10 years, I came away and I was doing this, and straight from university, I was going to galleries and doing workshops, helping people get more from their cameras, whether it was kids or whether it was adults and everyone in between. And I really enjoyed it. And I've always really enjoyed that aspect because it's an immediate response you get, and it's a really something that's always inspired me, and it probably gives me the most sense of satisfaction. I love photography and I love taking photographs, but I'm eternally frustrated with the results. Okay, so even photographs that have won awards, I don't really like looking at them because I can see, and even the awards ones are worse, right? Because you can't actually tell anyone what your issues with the photo, because that just kills it for other people, like looking at your photos, go, oh, that's an amazing photograph. Plus the fact that sometimes I'm trying to sell them as a print as well. If you're showing someone a print and you go, yeah, it's really good, but I really hate this bit, and highlight the bit that you hate about the photo, they're not going to buy it. So I find that kind of aspect of photography really good, but kind of frustrating as well with workshops and showing people. What you get is you get this immediate satisfaction when something clicks in them, and they're taking a photo and they're really pleased with what they're doing, and that's always been a really important part of my job satisfaction, if you like. That's something that I really like. The photography is more of a drive and a personal drive, and the workshop side of things is the rewarding part of that, I think, for me at least. So I'd done these 10 years and I still hadn't quite identified or answered that question of what kind of photographer do I want to become. And as a result, I was a very general photographer. And so I mean, what is a photographer? What does a photographer have to be? And it's a really interesting question, because I think if we go back to that beginning with the public perception of a photographer and our idea of a photographer as I almost certainly going to be worlds apart, and it really does help to put yourself into a position where you're thinking what people might think of photography and what they think of photographers, because that's these are the people that you're working with, these are the people that will invest in you and your skills. So you need to know where they're coming from. And I mean, if we take an idea of, for example, this is just a screen grab of a search for a wedding photographer. If you present yourself as a wedding photographer, you're probably not going to, because it's not enough to present yourself as a wedding photographer. They want a lifestyle wedding photographer, or a traditional wedding photographer, a photojournalist wedding photographer, lifestyle, black and white, loads of different types of wedding photographers. And that's, if you look at the industry there, that's where it is. You have to present yourself in a quite a tight niche stylistic and everything else. But at the same time, if you do that, I guarantee that you would still get a client that would go to you, oh, do you do video? And it's like that juxtaposition of being a very specific photographer who can also suddenly pop out and do videos. Videos are really interesting subject as well, but you see how that struggles to marry with each other. Yet it is the perceived, that's not just people getting married, that's business owners and everyone. They want something really specific, but they actually also want some skill sets. So it's a very interesting thing. I personally believe that most specialist photographers are probably very good at lots of other photography. So I think a sports photographer could be a very good wildlife photographer, very good wildlife photographer could be a very good sports photographer, as long as they're invested in what they're photographing, as long as they're passionate and understand what they're photographing. Those skills are always transferable. And I think it's the authenticity of the photographer that is what it will boil down to in the future. So, being authentic and passionate about something will go a long way. There's lots of other things that you need to think about as well, but that's kind of your foundation that you need to build on, I think. So, we're kind of in this kind of weird world that's come about through technology, which is great, by the way. I love digital photography. I love the instantaneous. I've trained in film, but it was the instantaneousness, he says, waiting for a week before he got his photos back as an 8-year-old. But that perceived instantaneousness of clicking a button and then getting a photograph back, that I love. And technology is just taking that further and further and further. But get myself back on track before I get too crazy. But yeah, I think really it's this world of going from university environment into a working environment is probably where you see this idea of specialism, where you're free to have as much time to express yourself creatively within a brief or project, but to that's the creative side of it in an educational environment. It's very visual, it's very artistic, it's very aesthetical in a way, and conceptual as well. When it comes to making a living as a photographer, unless you're extraordinarily lucky, creativity becomes working around the constraints of the job that you're given, right? So you leave university, you've got to pay for rent, you've got to pay for food, whatever, and you can't take however long it takes, and you can't just borrow that piece of equipment from the department or whatever. So suddenly the creativity has to translate. You still have to be creative aesthetically and with your camera, but actually the creativity becomes about working with the constraints of who's paying you to take the photograph. And that could be, most of the time it's time, that's the big one, money and equipment as well. And so suddenly the creativity that's part of it as well. And that's a big thing to get used to, and a big thing to get your head around. But when you do it, you can be very, very successful. So that's kind of where a photographer is at the moment, in my view. Obviously, I have a very specific, I can only go on my journey. I can't. Hopefully you'll have loads of other great talks who will share their different journey, I'm sure. So I got to this point of managing to scrape by, managing to survive, and doing lots of different things, but not really feeling necessarily. I still dreaded the question of what kind of photographer you are. This kind of, well, what kind of specialist are you? What are you? This photographer? Are you that? And I always hated that question. I still hate that question. And that's where I started coming up with this idea of the walking photographer, of walking photographer. It is a bit of it was a single answer to a multifaceted question, I think, because there are other factors involved. So firstly, it was that question of what kind of photographer you are. Now, when I choose walking photographer, suddenly I'm able to not dread that question, and maybe even negate that question, because when people know you're the walking photographer, they should kind of know what kind of photographer you are. Yet, as I said earlier, I didn't like being pigeonholed. I didn't like being put in a box. It's broad enough to keep me, inspired and interested and not concerned or fearful about being down a too narrow pathway. And so as a walking photographer, I could be out in the countryside, do vista landscapes. As the walking photographer, I could be taking photographs of kingfishers and otters in the river. As a walking photographer, I'd be in a city centre doing street and travel photography in a market or whatever. So it's a nice umbrella term. I mean, I still get asked what my favourite kind of photography is, but it helps with my identity. And so for the first time, I was able to sort of get across the kind of sense of the sort of photographer that I wanted to be and wanted to know as. And the other thing that brought about, it sets the standard that someone who enjoys being outdoors, that want to be outdoors, and it communicates that with people as well. And so things started to move from that point of view. So in at that point, when I'm becoming the walking photographer, I should probably point out, I've moved to Leeds. So that this is the point I've moved from London with my partner to Leeds. She's from Durham and she wanted to be closer to her family. Leeds is a good connection to London, so I could carry on my London work when they booked me, and sometimes they had more commissions as well. So I would go and visit someone and photograph them in Newcastle or wherever. And I could start creating my networks, and networks and networking are a really interesting thing. And say networking is a really interesting thing. I like, in the back of my head, I'm rolling my eyes because that's the sort of phrase that would really make my eyes roll in the back of my head when I was a student. But it's really, the importance of networking is incredible. And I'll talk about that later, but I think it will come through anyway as I talk and share my experience. So I was able to start forging new networks in Leeds anyway. But again, this walking photographer idea grew. And so I started to, outdoors, the more I wanted to spend time outdoors, I wanted to be out. And this is the reality, right? That's what I want. But I've still got to pay rent. I've still got to do all these other things. So I needed to find a way to fund myself being outdoors, okay, and taking photos. And there's a few ways I could have gone about it, but with that thing that makes me passionate, that workshops, teaching, helping people to improve their photography in a practical way, that was at the core, and that's something I've been doing for a long time. So I kind of knew that was there, and so I started walking photographer, and I knew, as well as that being an identity, that to start helping people and reach. So up until this point, I'd never done private lessons. I'd never run events myself. It was through a museum, through a gallery, through an organization, whatever. So this was me trying to do it myself then. And I think there's a danger, confined amount of time to share what your life experience is that it might look that this happened all overnight. And it definitely didn't happen overnight. It's built up over a long time. And so I started to do these walks and started to get people. And then as I was doing that, I would start to get interest from councils, art initiatives, charities like Canal and River Trust. There's lots of other organisations, but as well as those kind of organisations, also get an interest from private sector organisations who do things like away days with their employees, and they do things like social events for team building and things like that. So there's suddenly a few different avenues to build up from around there, and that's when walking photographer became walking photography, really. And just so I could get that slight separation between my identity and a business that provides services, very subtle one, albeit. And so just to give you an idea, it's just a screen grab for my photo walks page. And this is a summary. You can all go on the website and see what it is anyway, but it's anything from night photography walks. So this time of year, night photography walks are great because it's dark quite early, and we'll go out to places like York, Manchester, Leeds, as well as some small towns and places like that, and do group night photography walks. They're great because people feel safe to go out and take pictures, and there's usually the great thing about night photography is it's the one kind of photography that I think looks really good in a proper camera with the camera on a tripod, and people get excited when they see those car lines go across in their pictures and all those kind of different things. So really quite a fun thing to do. But we also do seasonal photo walks. I'll refer to us as I start doing my Smeagol from Lord of the Rings, where I say, "Oh, we do this, we do that." It's just me. It's just me that does it. And so I'll do this time of year as well. I'll do things like Photoshop and Lightroom editing. A lot of people who come on my workshops are quite often don't like going out too long and in the cold too much, and they'll do a lot of editing in the winter as well. So I can do things like that in this studio here. So as I'm developing this project, this walking photography project, where I offer photography workshops, and incidentally I do nature walks as well, which aren't photography related, they're nature related and wildlife related, as well as private lessons. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about it and move on. But the important thing with this is the audience and keeping the audience engaged, and probably my biggest challenge with this side of the business of what I do is how to keep my existing customers, so people who've been coming, some of them for 10 years, because it's been running for 10 years now, and new ones. So I get new customers all the time. And that balance is very tricky, because when it comes to audience, it's a kind of, so people buy my prints and my photographs typically aren't the same people that will come on a photo walk. Most people will come on a photography walk. They want to print their own photos and take photos for themselves. They don't want to be taken by someone else. And I mean, that's not always true, but that's a general. And so what you find when you're doing a business, especially where it's kind of multifaceted with different elements to it, for me is important, and I'll show you why in a bit. But the trick is to identify those audiences and pander to all of them without isolating some of them, if that makes sense. If that makes sense, hopefully it makes sense. So here, maybe one of the best bits that I think I do that panders to everyone is my newsletter. So my email newsletter that I send out every week. Now, the theme changes on a week by week, but the gist of it is that you send an intro that's relevant, that's time relevant in the intro. I have this thing where if you do one thing, I do a monthly one as well, and the monthly one is 4 things to try this month. And so you're offering people tips and hooks that are helpful for them, but you're also reminding them that you're there. So, and this is probably only about a fifth or a quarter of the newsletter, this one on the left, where we've got a screen grab if you do one thing and events, and there'll be, so I do a photographer focus. So we talk like a couple of sentences about a photographer that I like or might have a photo book of. And I just introduce people to that with a link for them, usually going to a Magnum website or somewhere like that for them to find out further. And I'll do a pub quiz as well. So for people who want to challenge themselves and answer questions, it's just 5 questions. So it's this mix of, offering something that entertains whilst reminding people. And I'll usually do a little offer, like one little offer. So it's a mixture of both. And that's the newsletter. And the great thing about a newsletter is that will go out to people who've never booked a workshop before. They might just sign up to the newsletter to see what it looks like. But it also appeals to the people that have been coming to workshops and walks for 10 years, So that's a really core part of my marketing now, and marketing is really, really important. I'm going to skip this middle column if we divide this screen into threes, and I'm going to go straight over to this Facebook page, my Facebook page. And the interest, Facebook's an interesting one. I would take that to represent social media, and social media is a very interest. I don't think social media has the impact that it did 5 years ago, for sure. But it's still really important. And I mean, I'm including LinkedIn and everything social media. And you might not choose whether you choose one or four is up to you. That comes down to identifying your audience, right? So I was saying like what your audience is. Now, if you're a headshot photographer, you probably only really need to be on LinkedIn, maybe. You could argue that anyway. But whatever you decide to do, I think it's important, even when you don't see direct results as a result of it, that you keep it up. And I know that, I've had posts that I've updated on Facebook where you have like 2 or 3 likes, yet 2 or 3 orders come in or bookings come in, and those people that booked didn't even hit like or comment or anything like that. They just saw the post and then decided to book. And so that numbers game with social media is a really one, because I think it's one of the things today is, I mean, I know photographers, or no, I'm not going to say, I know people who have tens of thousands of followers, but none of them will ever part with any money. And so you kind of have to ask yourself, what, maybe you get a free hat sent, even some free trainers, but that's those things, unless you sell them on eBay, that's not going to be a fulfilling, rewarding relationship on social media, because you're continually in that chain of churning out stuff to get loads of likes and loads of followers, but it doesn't necessarily generate. If you can have smaller engagement, but if that's smaller, if you've got your page and 250 people of them are spending money a month, I know what I would rather have, and but it's an easy thing to where you chase the likes and chase the followers, very sure of it. But what I do think is interesting is I got distracted, something flashed up on my screen. What I do think is interesting is that when you're putting those things out, whether you're running a business that requires bookings or not, it's finding people are there. And I remember leaving or graduating and almost half expecting to just phone me up and book me. And there's a danger that actually, say you even do get booked, you get booked by someone and you get a job and you do the job really well, and you think, oh, great job, client's really happy. There's no way they're not going to book me again. Now, the problem is that you think, or I think, that I'm in their head all the time, but I'm not in their head all the time. And that person's probably meeting photographers every day. They're probably getting emails from photographers, and or they might be in a coffee shop, and it's getting to that point where they need to book another photographer in again. And they might think of you, and they're, oh, I'll send them an email. But then they run into someone at a coffee shop, and that coffee shop person's like, oh yeah, I've just done a shoot with so-and-so. And then suddenly that person in the coffee shop in the same queue gets the job because they're there in front of that person. And that's what Facebook allows, or social media allows you to do. It allows you to get your work in front of that person on a regular basis. It's just reminding them that you're here, because reminding them that you're there, the chances are you won't mind when they come to think about it. Even if you did a good job and an outstanding job, it's that so often it's that collision of being in the right place at the right time. But if you're blacking out on social media and not networking and not meeting people, you're never going to be at the place at the right time to get that dream job or another. Anyway, waffled on about social media long enough. I don't really. It is a necessary evil that will work for for. I mean, like I say, I don't think it works as much as it used to, but it definitely still works. I wouldn't abandon it. So if we move on to the middle column, and this is maybe more prevalent to my business model, but it's an important one. I'm going to start with the bottom one where it says Google, and you can see my business listing there. But the important bit of this is the reviews. And because reviews are, I don't know if you've ever spent over £100 on something, but when I do, I won't buy it without looking at a review. And you go and you don't just look at the first 5-star review. You go and look at the ones, and then you look at the most recent and stuff like that before you make your decision. And why we would expect anyone to be any different when booking a photographer or booking a workshop or whatever it is, it's the same process. People are parting with their money. Money's hard earned, and they want to make sure that it's a smart investment. So, and I think really trust, that highlights trust. And if you're authentic, like I mentioned earlier, if you're doing something that you're passionate about, that goes a long way with trust. But a bit of extra icing on the trust cake is this reviews. If you can get people to review you, maybe you don't set it up on Google or whatever, but maybe you get someone to email in a review from your first job or jobs that you're doing, and then you plonk them on your website, you plonk them on a Facebook update or an Instagram update. You could even do a picture and paste that testimonial in front of it, because what it does, it shows you that you out there working, someone's just booked you and they're really happy, and that's a really important part of any business. Reviews is a really big part of, like, you could pick any business out of a hat, and reviews are core in the world of the internet. So moving on from that, I've got here Welcome to Yorkshire website, which is a big tourist website. I think it's around, it's easily over 100,000 visits a day. But I should have looked it up before, but it's a phenomenal lot of traffic on that website. And so what I've done is I've featured walks for them. I mean, I did get paid to do it, but not much. If I was making a living out of that, I wouldn't do it because it's not paid enough. And this is another interesting thing of when you're trying to navigate the world post grad, is kind of, what is worth your time investment. There will be a lot of things and a lot of people asking you to invest your time for very little, if not nothing, and you're going to have to learn to assess which ones are the best to invest your time into. And this is a good one because it's a big site. It's connected to my audience, because lots of tourists and people wanting to do things in Yorkshire will come onto this site. So I'm quite happy to offer my time, write a route and a walk, and provide my photographs. And because the reward from that could potentially be tenfold, especially when summer approaches and people are thinking, I'm going to go to Malham. I'm there. It's got my brand, it's got my link to my website, it's got my identity as a walking photographer. It's all there, so it's worth my investment. And there's lots of different things you can do. And as photographers, there's lots of photography blogs related to whatever sector you want to move into and get really big visits as well. So, I can't think of examples off the top of my head, but there's some blogs that are like, what's in my kit bag, stuff like that. I don't know. It could be, I'm watching the Great British Bake Off, so I'll probably throw in too many Bake Off analogies in there. But it could be a cookery website, and if you're into food photography, maybe you could do a guest blog post on there. So marketing's a big part of it, and the thing with marketing, it's very easy to channel lots of energy and or expense in the wrong direction. So it always pays to just pause and think about how beneficial each aspect of this is to what you want to do. Like, if for me, TikTok is well beyond anyone or most people that would be interested in doing my workshops. So I don't bother with, but YouTube is actually pretty productive as well. And I want more time to contribute on YouTube actually, but I don't. Okay, so I'm going to pause for breath. So as I was developing walking photography and walking photographer tours, I started doing more wildlife. Before that, I wasn't doing wildlife photography at college. Even after I was doing all these other things. For me, wildlife photography was a bit of an inaccessible thing for whatever reason. It really it didn't feel accessible to me. And so now that I'm doing photographer stuff, suddenly it feels a little bit more accessible. And I start to dip my toes into this and I'm going out and taking wildlife photographs to publicize the walks and the workshops that I'm doing and satisfy my own passion to photograph wildlife as well. And this was one of the first projects that represent that sort of time really. And it was loads. And the interesting thing about that is that actually I didn't need a specialist equipment. I could use my existing camera setup to document toads and the story of toads and the threats to toads. Now, I don't know whether, can you see, well, I won't ask. I'll just move this around in case. I've moved my video thumbs. Has that moved for you or not? I don't know. It doesn't move, so it probably sets up. But the key thing, I wanted you to see the kid with the unicorn coming ahead anyway, and the car coming round the light. So that demonstrates the threat to the toad that's trying to cross a road anyway. So the idea is there's a narrative there to a point, and all done with just my existing photography equipment that I used my day-to-day work and life. Okay, photograph, and the photograph that's been commended in the British Wildlife Awards there is an underwater photo, but that photo is taken with a compact camera in a underwater housing that I bought off Amazon. Not a fair enough investment, but not very much investment at all. Pretty comparatively cheap. I'm pretty sure you couldn't give away that I took the picture with now, and so this is of stuff, and I guess why I included this project is because it shows you that you don't. I think there's a need to invest heavily in equipment, and there is an argument, but that's only if you've got a specific idea and you're trying to do something. Going back to that creativity and thinking about the limitations of what you have, budget, time, and choosing a subject and a story that fits and will work with what you've got and the cameras that you've got and the equipment that you've got. And that's what this was about. And so the more I get into this outdoors, photography, workshops, and all this, the more I delve in, the more serious I take it, I guess, in a way, and the more I want to under the skin of outdoor thinking. So I'm reading a lot now on, at this point, this is still early on people who write books about being outdoors and watching stuff and all that kind of thing. I'm really trying to absorb myself into this outdoor thinking and other people's relationships with being outdoors. And this quote here from Robert McFarlane from The Old Ways, he's a very good outdoors writer. It's some really, really powerful books that he writes. And this quote stayed with me for a while. And it's still, I think, I have it on some kind of CV or statement somewhere in the endless internet, which I can't find, but I've managed to grab the quote anyway. And and I'll just read it in case your thumbnails are blocking it. I'll read it out to you. So for some time now, it has seemed to me that two questions we should ask of any strong landscape are these. Okay, so the first thing I want to disentangle is this idea of a strong landscape. So from my own interpretation of that, a strong landscape can be anything. It can be a living room. It can literally be anything. So anything that inspires you. And then, so firstly, what can I know when I'm in this place that I can know nowhere else? And then, vainly, what does this place know of me that I cannot know of myself? And the way I've incorporated that into my own ethos or methodology or whatever you want to call it is that in every environment I photograph or run a workshop in, walk in, is I'm thinking deeply about my relationship with it and its relationship with me. And the more I do that, the more I'm able to get from that photographically, and the more I'm able to offer insights to the people that are coming to workshops. And that creates an interesting scenario with the workshops, because what my philosophy has been is to look at core locations, basically. So I can tell you one of those core locations is Bent Cliffs, which is on the east coast of Yorkshire. Another one of those is Malham, and that's in the Yorkshire Dales, just north of where I am. I'm in Burley and Wharfdales, 20 minutes from Leeds, 20 minutes from Bradford. And so those two places, and I haven't included those locations in this today because I just would not be able to do that justice in 5-10 minutes. And it would actually hurt me to do it. I'd just be upset because I need to get across that relationship. But I have got a few examples that show you of kind of where I'm coming from this. But the point is you have to, or for me, I have to understand the location deeply before I can start sharing that with people, either as a photograph or as a location to explore. Now, where that becomes problematic with my business is that people like to try new things and people like to try other places. So I have to try and find a way of keeping things moving. And I'll show you in a minute that I'm working with another location now. I have to keep, this is, if we go back to the very beginning where I was saying, where is the value in photography? Now, the value of people who are invested in me to guide them and take them around places. Yes, I will get these new people come in overseas or coming up from other parts of the country to go to Bedford and go to Malham. But I also have a sense of duty to the people that have supported me for 10 years in walking, and I feel this responsibility to offer them something new. And so there's always this tension between me wanting to stay in the places that I've known for so long, which I do anyway, but trying to find a time to get that similar or close to same relationship with other places. And but thinking about it more generally, what I tend to do on private lessons and tours is that this is very achievable in your own garden and yard. And it's so just to solve anyone's or put a stopper in anyone's imaginings of me living in a country villa, live in a Victorian terrace in the middle of it in a house with my family, and our yard is about 3.5. It's a mill worker's house. This is a mill town, Hill Village, and so we're blessed with loads of cars around us. But the house is, it's a nice roomy house, but the garden is very, very small. It's about 3 meters square. And so what I wanted to do was I created a project, Revelations from the Terrace, because we're in a terrace. And the idea is that I take photos, doing that Smeagol thing again, but I take photographs in the immediate area of this test. And this project got killed off pretty quickly when lockdown came because everyone started taking photographs in their garden and in their immediate area. So there was no risk in the end with this project. But the concept of it is really good because you can see that in any environment, the more you get to know it, the more you get under the skin of it, the better the photos you can take. And for anyone who's interested in wildlife and nature photography, have a look when you're going around the World Wild Photography Awards. If you get to see it, it tours around the country. It's always good in Kensington. But when you do that, read the backstory because you will have a high caliber of photographers, but quite often the photos and the projects that do really well are personal projects. They're projects from environments that they know really well. And it's no coincidence that when you watch the last minutes of Planet Earth, whatever program, you will see that videographer, that camera person with a guide who's a local guide, because that local guide gives that camera person a direct route into their knowledge and their relationship with the environment. And without those people, half of the footage, the incredible footage that you see on the BBC documentaries and Netflix and Apple TV, they wouldn't exist without those guides who very rarely get as much credit as they deserve. That's for sure. So get into, if you're progressing with this, and I don't even think it has to be wildlife or nature, whatever your chosen field or area of photography that excites you the most, the more you understand the environment that it happens in, that stands for studios too, right? The more you understand that, the better your photographs are going to become. I'm going to skip this bit because it's a bit, just because time's getting on. Anyway, do you know what this is? So this was quite a bit of an award. This one British wildlife photographer, and it resulted in quite a bit. It was quite good. It got published across Europe in magazines around there, and this is from the same idea. This is the same concept of revelation, the terrace, and so actually this photograph, our house and our terrace row is just underneath where the crop is. And I think I wasn't going to talk about it, but I am now. So I want to get across here is when I walked out, and anyone else who walked out this morning on the morning I took this would have thought it was a dark, dank day because there was low, thick cloud and there was no light anywhere. Now, because I have this kind of relationship with the area, and I found I was quite often, I know that we get this, what we call a cloud version over the valley. So I live in Wharfdale Valley. And quite often we get this low cloud cover, and quite often I'm running up onto the moors to look down and photograph it. So I'm looking for the signs, and there's little clues in the horizons and the surrounding areas that give away whether it's just a big, thick, low cloud day or whether it's actually a cloud inversion like this. And so all these clues were pointing to the fact that this was a cloud inversion. Now, I was talking about creatively thinking and working with the limitations that you have. On this morning, I was doing the school run. So I've got to get the kids ready and into school. Otherwise, we get fined or get told off by the head teacher for turning up late. So I can't take the kids up on the moor or look down. So I run upstairs and I get my drone. I've got a drone and I've got about 5 minutes I can get away with before I've got to get the kids out. And sure enough, my hunch that this is a cloud inversion comes to fruition. So I can see that it is a cloud inversion. And then I see the pigeons come in and you take the shot and, it does well. So, that's an example, a direct example of how your relationship with your environment and understanding it can result in some really rewarding, beneficial work. So I suggested earlier that I was looking at new locations to start doing workshops, and I'm already doing workshops here. But I feel like my relationship with this location isn't as strong as it is with Bempton and Malham that I referenced earlier, and with my local village and local area. And so I'm working on that now, and I'm trying to build that up in Whitby. And Whitby is a really fascinating place. There's a lot of inspiration. It definitely, I've always reacted well with Whitby. I really like it. And so this is a location that I'm starting to use to build up my knowledge, to get more photographs that are interesting, and start to understand. So, for example, what we've got there in the upper left-hand corner is Whitby Abbey, which is a really iconic landmark. There's a lot of iconic landmarks in Whitby, but that's one of them anyway. And if you know where the sun and the sun was going to be at certain times of year, that's really going to help inform those decisions. But for me, it's not just about landscapes, landmarks. It's not even just about wildlife. It's also about people. And so for my approach to, again, to not wanting to be pigeonholed and wanting to be free to explore what I want to explore with a camera. And, for me, a landscape with people in it is without people, especially in here. So a lot of people come to Whitby or go to Malham or somewhere and try and avoid putting people in it. But people that have shaped landscapes for centuries, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. And so they're an integral part to the story of an environment they're exploring. And it would be, funny enough, I don't know if anyone knows, but you have this goth festival that happens twice a year, or dress up in goth and steampunk, and it's really quite an extraordinary thing to witness and be part of. And so I do work here. I take people and we look at ways to document the event, which is quite incredible. It's quite unique, and I really love it. And so what you get out of it is photographs that which look good and tell part of a bigger story. And so that's a really cool thing. Now, I was a little bit hesitant. You're getting a little sneak peek here because I was there this summer, and I came barn owl that was nesting, and unusually it was just one adult, and normally there's two, so one adult's disappeared. And so we've got one adult barn owl that's hunting in front of this iconic landmark, right, the Whitby Abbey. And so I'm in a bit of a pickle now, because I had limited time that I could observe barn owl, and this was quite late in the season. The barn owl chicks are, so I didn't quite get the shots I'd really looked for. So I'm in this place where I'm a bit hesitant to share. It's not kind of where I want them to be, but at the same time, no one else has shared photos like this. So this is where this idea of perfectionism and reality and kind of, you have to kind of think where you're at with it and what's going to be more beneficial. Because if I wait for the perfect shot, which might never happens quite a lot in wildlife photography, and then someone else shares a story on this, that's it. That's that opportunity missed. So I mean, this is a sort of I'd probably push out for a commission, but also try and use it as a promotional activity as well for the walking photography stuff. And I think, just before I move on from that, the idea of wildlife photography and nature photography, I think unless you're extraordinarily lucky, you're almost always going to be doing speculative work. So I think you'd be very, very lucky. I mean, happen from time to time, you might get commissioned for some bits and pieces, but usually that's quite a tight pool of very well-known photographers and videographers. So most of the time, you're doing it self-edited and pitching to different people. And the good about a project like this is that you can pitch it to lots of different things. You can pitch it to art publications, tourist publications. There's lots of different options for it. And I can't really talk about this without the importance of photographing wildlife and your own behavior, because it would be remiss of me not to. And that is really with any wildlife. If you're present as a photographer, it's your responsibility to not really impact on that scene. And if you do impact on that scene, you're probably not going to get it away because the wildlife will run off or fly off. But in this scenario here, we've got a barn owl, one parent, so doing double the work, and your behavior impacts on that bird hunting and bring to its young, that's a problem, and that you don't want to be a part of. You won't get the shot, but you'll inhibit the behavior and potentially cause harm for that. So always think about your presence. Most of the time when I'm photographing wildlife, I'm hidden in a hedge or behind a tree, being part of that landscape, trying to become part of that landscape. And if we the Robert McFarlane quotation, it's this kind of vain to be part of that environment and be accepted as part of that environment. And if you're accepted as part of that environment, well, just behaves naturally around you, and then you witness more things as well. Yeah, that's just a little side note there as well. And talking about passion projects, so and not just a passion project. This I'm putting this here because this had turns and twists. So this is my village. This is Lower Wharfdale. You can see those houses towards that hill. And you can see our house is in the middle there. And this is a load of greenbelt that is being built on. Right now, 500 homes getting put in. They're putting in new road and stuff like that. So when this story started a long time ago, and initially, funny enough, during an election year, it got elected, and then when landslide vote, suddenly they put in the property developers put in an appeal and were allowed to build 500 homes here. And do you know what? It's not a black and white area. Housing and stuff is an issue. But from my point of view, whatever happened, I felt this overwhelming desire to document this part of the village that was going to disappear under homes, and the wildlife and the habitat. So I started doing that. I mean, those fields have provided generations and generations of territory for barn owls and to breed and to hunt. So over the winter, they'll be hunting over these fields, and in the spring, they breed and raise their young over these fields. They have slightly bigger territories, but that forms a core part of their territory. And this is a photo from a ringer who visits that nest box that's on that site year after year, which I was privileged to witness and photograph. And yeah, so that landscape started to get torn up, and actually in the second or in fact every part of the appeal process, my photographs of the barn owls, curlews, lapwings were used as evidence to argue against building this housing estate, basically. Unfortunately, to no avail. So then I've continued to document the process of the buildings going up, the groundworks and stuff like that. And I've been sharing one or two blogs and photos about it. This is going back a few years still. And And so interestingly enough, because this is a breeding ground for ground nesting birds like the curlew and like the lapwing, I got contacted by curlew activist and ambassador Mary Carwell, who we see here. These are all my photographs. So she phoned me, moved by the stuff that I'd been sharing, and offered to help, just raise a spotlight on it if she could. She's an author, she's a pretty well-known environmentalist. She's also a radio producer, lots and lots of hats. And anyway, so we were very generous of her to do that. But then, as a result of that and of that initial contact, she invited me, or commissioned me, in fact, to photograph one of the events that they were doing in Malham. So one of the areas that I was saying that I've built this connection with, and that's, I don't know whether anyone knows David Gray, but he was a very big singer in the noughties. I had a lot more hair then. And so he was doing his anniversary tour of his album, which I think is in like the top 10 best-selling albums or something like that. And so he's the patron of Curlew Action, the charity. And so he was going around on this world tour, and at the start of every tour, he plays a video asking people to donate to Curlew Action. And so I was commissioned to document that process and of the recording, get some shots of David Gray, etc., etc. And since that time, every year I get a couple of commissions from Curlew Action, and from that, I've got, this is a subject that has sparked something in me as well. I don't just go and turn up when I'm getting paid for it. I go to their events when I can. I go and meet up with people. I email. I'm in contact with the people that I've met as a result of this, and networking has, plays a real part. But I used to hate and cringe at the word networking, and the idea of networking is just, I hate it because it feels false. But this comes back to the very beginning when I say what kind of photographer you want to be, because when you find a subject that you care about and you're passionate about, it's not working anymore. It's you being involved and participating in an area that you really feel for. And then as a result of that, you start meeting other people, and then other people, so this summer I've been with British Trust of Ornithology researchers who are GPS tagging curlews, trying to find out more information about them. And as a result of that, there was quite a lot of publication and lots of articles and so basically from this blog post, lots of spin-offs and things started coming together and coming through. And that I just find that really just mad, that just a post that you put up there, I probably only expecting a few villagers or something to and give a thumbs up on, suddenly spiraled off into something completely different and expanded. So I'm going to take this opportunity just to maybe look at the idea of wildlife and nature photography and dissect it a bit very quickly, as you said, but I've just pulled out a few examples. So if you're going to photograph wildlife, one of the problems that you face, other than it being a very competitive market already, is not only is it very competitive and you have a bit of clique at the top, you also have a lot of people who are retired, who really like wildlife photography, have a nice disposable income, and they have a lot of time. And time is one of those big things with wildlife and nature photography. The more time you have, the better shots usually. And guess what? On top of those things, they're quite often happy to have their work published for free. And so they'll invest the time, they'll invest the equipment, and then they'll let those images be used for free. So there's anyone wanting to survive in wildlife photography, it's a really, really tricky, tough area, and most people do workshops as well. But if we're going to approach it from a photographic angle, let's have a little look. So quite often what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have really technically beautiful and accurate photos. So the right lighting, the right exposure. And when I say right exposure, that doesn't mean, in the middle, that dial, or you don't get those dials anymore, but you know what I mean? You can underexpose it as long as it's right for the scene. So quite often, and especially if you're going into competitions, they really do that keeping thing, and it winds me up because sometimes you get photos that make it and passed around and they go. So quite often you buy entries into these competitions. You might buy 10, but you've only got 5 ones that you're really happy with. So you bung in another 5, and then suddenly one of them makes the shortlist of outside of the 5 that you wanted, and they ask for the high res and the raw. And at that point, you've blown it for another year, because that's the photo. Whilst it looks good online, technically it hasn't got that same excellence that some of the others have. So that wildlife judges are really quite they do that pixel peeping thing, and they have to be good. And it's the same for editors as well of magazines. So you really want to be acquiring that technical excellence to get through. If you get it, you can put it on people's blogs, no one, or Instagram. They don't notice. And so this is different, and this is, so what I like about this photo is that it's this photo that group that we were talking about, the pensioners with lots of money and time and willing to give away their images. This is the sort of shot that they would pass up and they wouldn't do, because it's not, it's not beautiful or aesthetically stunning. But what it does is it highlights the real threat to a bird. One of the biggest threat to ground nesting birds in the lowlands. So curlews nest on the moors and in the lowlands as well. But in the lowlands, it's urban sprawl, it's farming, and it's people with pets as well. So dogs off leads, that sort of thing. And so this highlights one of the, this curlew's looking to nest, and it's surrounded by earth diggings and stuff like that. So it communicates an idea, and that idea actually is important will become more and more important as curlew conservation issues are highlighted. So it doesn't always have technically stunning work of art to keep money coming in and keep you surviving as a photographer. Emotive. So if you can express emotion or put an emotion, and I've put this photo in there because I shared this on WhatsApp with a few conservationists, that researchers, and their reaction was that it felt really like it caught them in their emotions and their guts when they saw that photo. So that from people that are spending lots of time with these birds, the subject that you're photographing, that's usually a good sign. You can also go with things that you haven't seen before, and this is a danger. So you have to be a bit careful with this, because if you don't know your subject very well, everything is a new behavior or new scene. And now I know I haven't seen many curlews in the snow, and so earlier this year when it snowed, I had a bit of time and I went out seeking out curlew to see what they did in the snow, and actually they do what they normally do, to be honest. And so I took some shots of them in the snow. But then what happened, I started to witness this more unusual behavior. Well, again, it's not crazily unusual, but it's not well documented. And so what we have here is, because of the snow, the black-headed gulls aren't able to get into the earth, and they aren't able to get the worms out. So they're with the curlew, their beaks are long enough to go through the snow and get into the ground and pull out worms. So every time a curlew was pulling out a worm, these black-headed gulls were mocking the curlew, trying to get the curlew to drop the worm and grab the worm for themselves. It's called kleptoparasitism. And so if you've spent a lot of time with curlews and you've not witnessed that behavior before, you know that's a slightly rarer behavior, you know, and or not so well documented behavior. So then you can start to recognize where you might be able to get something interesting. And the stuff like this is always really interesting to researchers and publishers in the sector as well. So if you want to do something like that, rather than, and this is where people can get an edge on other photographers, the hobbyists, the keen hobbyists, is because quite often they're chasing species, ticking things off lists. If you become, you know, we're talking about specialism and generalism, but if you time with something that you can access, so you understand it's, and you start to recognize behavior that hasn't been publicized or shared widely before, then you can generate a lot of interest in your work and your photography. And I know that there's a lot of photographers into lots of other types of photography and other interests as well. So I mean, I feel fish now with, you know, a general theme of any creative, and that is a lifestyle of troughs and ups and downs. And so I'm very lucky, and I feel lucky to have survived the financial crash of 2010, Brexit, although I won't linger on that one, the pandemic as well, which I probably won't linger on the two. But what I will say with the pandemic is I will not be surprised at all if we see another pandemic in our lifetimes. In fact, I'm pretty sure we will. Now, what shape that will take and how governments and people will react to it, I don't know. But I think this kind of thing will happen more in the future, or will happen again at least. And even if it doesn't, I think it would be amiss not to prepare for something like that. And so I'm, you know, when you're making your income through creativity, through photography, or whatever you end up doing it in, usually the more diverse your approach or the more backup plans you have, the stronger and the more likely you are to survive those bumps that will happen. You know, and maybe we won't get a pandemic, but we definitely will get another financial crash, that's for sure. Because it happens. And so you need to be prepared for that. And there's lots of different ways, but the way I prepare for that is being flexible and diverse and asking those questions at the beginning of, you know, where is the value in photography today? And trying to align that with my passions and my interests and make that work. So during the pandemic, during the lockdowns, there was a lot of different things people did. One of the things that I did was to turn my photographs into graphics and putting them onto clothing and other products as well. So prints, mugs, clothing, and so then you're direct feeding to you're able to make money and pay rent and things like that. I think one of the other things that I found myself diversifying in a little bit more of organically is also video, because I do video for the promotion of my workshops, but more and more I'm getting approached by production companies who need little snippets of wildlife for their program. So most recently being Channel 5 with a documentary they're doing on Clare Balding walking the rivers. There was stuff they missed, they didn't get shots of, and they found one of my videos on YouTube of this otter. I've just put it there, plonked it in the middle, just to remind me to mention it. And so basically they sent me a list of things that they were missing, and I was able to read quite a few of them. And I think, if you know, that's another example of finding little gaps and things, and every little trickle of income you can make is shoring up your survival as a creative, because photography is hard, right? And it would be easy for me to come here and say, oh, life's great, it's really good, just as it would be easy for a wildlife photographer to say, oh, look at this amazing wildlife, and look how beautiful it is. And the reality is very different. You know, we are in the Anthropocene extinction event, so we are seeing extinction happen at a faster rate because of human interaction with the planet. And you know, there's a responsibility there to share that and make sure people are aware of that. How you go about it is, you know, another conversation for another time. But you know, we are that's where we are. But there's a responsibility to communicate the whole truth, and that's my responsibility as a photographer, talking to people who want to become photographers as well. And other people shed different angles on this as well. But for my part, I think that the more you are able to adapt and grow with a changing industry that's in constant flux, probably the more resilient you'll be when unexpected things happen. And unexpected things will happen for sure. And photography, unfortunately, is one of those most precarious ones of all the industries. Maybe Adam's quite precarious as well. There's probably a lot actually, but from my point of view, photography is one of those. So we have to, you know, the interesting thing with this Anthropocene is that the species that are more adaptable, that are able to adapt quicker and faster, are ones that are surviving and or thriving, and it's the is that are stuck in a niche, are struggling and are at risk of extinction. They can't adapt fast enough. So I find that there's a really fascinating parallel between photography and if a little bit crass maybe, but still it's interesting for, and I would encourage people to, where you want to be, but come at it with a very flexible, broad approach. And I've bored you for long enough, so I'm going to stop talking.
Do we see, does anyone have questions for Rich? Come on. What do you think, Shelley? I'm pointing the finger at certain people. So how about the project that you're doing that's in your valley? Where is it at now? Are there houses there now?
Yes, yeah. So there's a show home up. The foundations, they're building roads through those fields. So basically a 7-year project that started at the beginning of this year. So they started doing foundations this year. And yeah. So it's pretty epic. It's pretty tragic actually, because the first thing they do is they knock down all the trees and the hedgerows, and they, apart from a few trees which are under preservation order, and yeah, so it's pretty depressing. But you know, it is what it is, as they say.
And then how about we'll just curious because sometimes we do need housing, but then what about
Yes.
what's the average price of those homes?
Oh well, there's an
Yeah, are they?
they're around about, you know, 400,000-500,000, but there'll probably be more than that by the time they go, you know, but by the time they get the last houses, they'll probably have gone up anyway. But yeah, they're not affordable by any stretch. I think the plan or the hope is that they bring the other house prices down existing in the village, because but you know, they're definitely not affordable housing. I think there might be a few gestures, but from what I've heard anecdotally, usually the plan is to provide a certain percentage of affordable housing, and then by the time it gets to building those, the contractor says that they've run out of money or something, and they don't get built. But that's a very cynical view.
Well, but that's probably the reality though. Yeah. Any other questions from anyone? No? So thanks a lot, Rich, because you really gave a broad, great overview for us. And that's exactly, I know that's oh, maybe I should ask Caitlin. Do you have any questions for Rich? Very comprehensive.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And sometimes it's nice that also when we tell the students things, but it's when we hear it from you and the other visiting guests that then it's like, okay.
Oh, good. Well, I'm certainly glad I didn't contradict you.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Good.
thanks very much. Thanks. Should we
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
thank you. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure. Right.
Good night. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
There we go.